So we have our bolognese sauce cooking. I did move it to a smaller burner, which is something you might want to do just so that the heat stays low and it can cook very, very well. I also started a pot of water, salted water, that I'm bringing to a boil so that I can eat my fresh pasta right when I'm done cutting it. So our dough has rested and we're going to start cutting it. What you want to do is lightly flour your work surface, which in this case can be your countertop directly. You can reuse that work board if you want, whatever you prefer. So we're going to lightly flour our work surface and we're going to cut our dough into 4 parts. So that is very helpful for you to know, not only because it's manageable when actually doing the cuts, but because this dough ball will feed about 4 servings. So 2 adults twice or 4 adults once. We're gonna start with the bigger ends. You can cut it however you want to 4 equal parts. I do not do 4 equal parts, which is fine. We're gonna work 1 part at a time. And with the other 3 parts that you're not using, you can reuse that damp tea towel that you used underneath your work board, and you can just drape it over your pasta so it doesn't dry out. So now we are going to take 1 part and we're gonna flatten it into a disc, which is as flat as you can to where it will feed through our pasta press. Now, I'm using a KitchenAid attachment because I don't like to work that hard. You can use a hand crank if you like to work hard. I work hard enough in every other area of my life. So we are going to turn our mixer on to the stir setting, and we're going to make sure that our pasta press is at 1. That is going to flatten your pasta and get it all even, and we're just going to feed it through like so. After you've run it through setting 1 once, lightly flour it, both sides, and run it through 1 again. Today we're going to be making fettuccine. And typically with fettuccine, you want it to be on a 7 setting. And what that means is 1 flattens your pasta, but every number that you graduate, so I've just turned the dial to 2, presses it tighter, making the pasta thinner and thinner. So if you were going to do an angel hair, for instance, you would go all the way up to your highest setting, which would be 9 or 10. We don't need to go quite that high because fettuccine is a bit thicker, so we're gonna go to about 7. And when I say about, what that means is sometimes, based on the consistency of your pasta, maybe it reaches the thickness that it needs to at 6. Maybe you need to go all the way up to 8. It just depends, it is by feel. But you're going to run your pasta through the press once on every number until you hit the number you're ending on. The only time you run it through twice on the same setting is that first time, which is not necessary. It's just what I like to do. You'll notice that my pasta is getting longer and longer. If it becomes too long, you can just cut it in half and deal with smaller pieces. And something that you want to keep in mind is just if your pasta gets a little too sticky, it will get stuck in the machine. So just make sure that you're continuing to lightly flour it so that it runs through very nicely. So I'm on setting 5 right now. I'm gonna go up to, as I said, 6 or 7. I feel like it's probably going to be a 7 setting today. So now we're on 6. And you really wanna make sure that you're feeding it through nice and flat. You don't have any wrinkles because that will create an inconsistency in your noodles. Yeah, we're gonna go up to 7 today because I feel like 6 is just a tiny bit too thick. It's very important you remember where you stopped before you cut yours in half so that you can pick back up where you left off. So now I've switched out my pasta attachment to be the pasta cutter. As I said before, we're going to be doing fettuccine. So this will cut our fettuccine. Now you want to make sure before you put it through the cut that it's really well floured. so that after it's cut, it doesn't stick to other pieces as you're continuing to work on your drying rack. So we're gonna run this through, just very gently guiding it along and let the machine do all the work. Beautiful pasta that we are just going to now transfer to our hanging rack. And we are going to be cooking this, so it's not going to totally dry out, which is good. And then these little pieces that fall, I just kind of coat them in flour and I collect them because again, we're going to be cooking this right away. So I'll just toss them into the pot as we do that. So we want to lightly flour this piece now. And also, if you don't want to go across 3 spools on your drying rack like I have here because I'm compensating for the length, you can just, again, cut your dough before you feed it through the press so that your pieces are smaller. And you can hang it over 1 spool instead, without it touching. So we'll do our last piece here. As I said, you divided your dough into 4 parts, so this is still just 1 part. So as you can see, it's a very lengthy process that requires a lot of patience, but you'll find it to be very zen. I love doing this, it's super, super calming. So once your pasta is cut, this is what is gonna feed 1 adult. So because 2 of us are eating today, we're gonna go ahead and do our second part, and that will be the fresh pasta that we make. Parts 3 and 4 we'll allow to dry out to use it another day. And when you let your pasta dry out, it usually takes about, I would say 24 to 48 hours depending on where you are. You wanna make sure that the conditions for drying your pasta are very dry. So why this is important is because if you have a clump of pasta drying, 1 part of the clump will not dry and instead it will mold. That's not very appetizing. So you want to make sure when you're drying your pasta out, it is very well evenly coated, and you want to lay them as straight as possible on top of, again, another tea towel, not moist but dry, and then you just let it air dry as best as you can. Or if you're lucky enough to have a dehydrator like we have, you can stick it in your dehydrator for about 2 hours and it should all be dry at that point. So it's super important in between pressing and cutting your pasta to periodically check back at your bolognese sauce. And make sure that you're stirring it, that if it's reducing, you're adding more of your tomato juice water. I have just added it a short while ago, and it hasn't quite reduced from that, but if it had, it's at this point that I would add a little bit more and keep doing so until it's really flavorful, which as I said before, would be about 2 to 3 hours at minimum. At this point, I'm going to add my salt and pepper. Salt and pepper are added to taste, so it is what your preference is. But this is looking really, really good. You just want to periodically check on it, and it's at this point also that you'll want to start boiling some water if you're going to be eating this right away, if you're going to be eating your fresh pasta right away. You want to boil some water, some salted water, and just keep your eye on both as you continue to prepare your pasta. Okay, so now our water is boiling and we're going to go ahead and drop in our pasta. These are our scraps that you'll remember me talking about, and these are the 2 portions of pasta that I had cut. So we're just going to throw it all in here. And bear in mind, fresh pasta cooks a lot quicker than dried pasta. So this should only take about 2 to 3 minutes to cook. I'm just gonna give it a little stir here, and you'll know it's ready when it rises and floats to the top. So it's super easy to tell, and we're just gonna wait about 2 to 3 minutes for it to cook. We'll strain it, and then we'll plate it. So it's floating to the top. It looks pretty good. We're gonna strain it. So we're gonna grab equal parts pasta here, plate them. Now we're gonna come over to our sauce, scoop it up, and slather it on. Look how beautiful that looks. And top with a little bit of basil and a little bit of parm. And now it's time to taste the fruit of our labor, or in this case, the pasta of our labor. Make sure you get all the good bits in here, a little bit of basil. Look at all that stuff. Oh my gosh, so good. So good.